joining Printing for Less in the USPS on our Mail Moment webinar, Increase Your ROI. My name is Sarah Hunter. I am the Director of Marketing here at Printing for Less. We have a great panelist this morning. We've got Jim Richard. He is a direct marketing specialist through DMA and also works with USPS's top 150 accounts, specializing in the creative impact of the first critical 15 seconds of the mail moment. We also have Eric Keskey and Gail Hagan from the United States Postal Service. They work in the Business Alliances Division. Gail has worked with USPS for over 30 years and Eric for over 20, so we've got a great group here, lots of knowledge. We want to make this webinar as interactive as possible, so if you guys have any questions, please chime in on the questions bar. And if it seems appropriate, I'll just ping Jim and we'll get those questions answered. If not, we'll try to answer all the questions at the end of the webinar. We're also going to be critiquing a couple of pieces that our customers have submitted, so we'll go through that at the end. And without further ado, Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Look forward to speaking with you and talking to you this morning about, the mail moment, or as I like to call it, winning the 3-second challenge. In my past life before the Postal Service, the CEO of our company always told us in marketing that I don't care which media you use, but you better prove that it works. So if you design a brochure that a sales rep, takes out in the field, did it help facilitate a sale? If you did a billboard, did people remember it and pick up the phone and call? So, I appreciate all the different mediums that are out there, and we have a lot at our disposal. But, when I look at mail and use it, I've still considered, again, proving that it works, that it makes a difference. And I think you'll see today when we look at the mail moment and how to create to get past that 3 to 15-second window, I think you'll feel more empowered about what you can do to make a difference in response, should you guys continue to use mail and print as part of your media mix. My background, too, being a part of the Direct Marketing Association of certification, we also looked at, things like email, digital, catalogs, all those different media channels as well. So I'll tie a lot of the creative across those different mediums because you'll see a lot of it is very similar. So let's get started. And again, on the questions, if you have a question, just pop it up in there. And it gets appropriate, we'll answer it. Every day we see almost 3,000 messages. I mean, if you think about it, you probably passed 100 billboards on the way to work this morning, or you had a bunch of banners pop up, you had a bunch of emails. So at the end of the day, though, we only remember about 4 of the messages that we were presented with. And when we look at the mail moment, we only average about 3 to 4 mail pieces a day in our mailbox. So it puts you in good company. If you think of, let's say, newspaper inserts, an insert is a good channel, but if you think of a newspaper, gosh, you could have anywhere between 200 or 300 messages that you compete with when you're in there. And if you want to go to the yellow pages, again, tons more. On average, we get about 137 unsolicited emails in a day as well. I don't know about you, but that holds true for me, and that's just the ones I see. I've tried to filter out as many as I can, but I still get that many that just sneak through. And the email moment is just split seconds because we're so now ready to delete things and so easy to delete things that even mail as a retention, even email as a retention channel, we've seen a decline in the response of it. But should you use the mailbox as part of your media mix? You have a good shot, 3 to 4 mail pieces to compete with. Now, when you think of the mail moment, it is a 3 to 15-second window. So, let me explain the way that works. So, my mail moment, when I come home in the afternoon, I usually stop by the mailbox, and as I'm cutting through the garage to get into the house, I'll stop over the recycle bin and experience my initial mail moment. And, if you're like me, typically you'll separate the mail into 2 piles. We'll call it the irrelevant pile, or the junk mail, and that ends up in the recycle bin, or bring it in the house to either look at it right then or get to it, later in the day. So when we look at the mail moment, it really is just about that 3 to 15 seconds. The first 3 seconds of the mail moment is all about just grabbing your attention. That's all it needs to do. But from the 4th to the 15th second, your brain wants to answer a question, and that is, what's in it for me? And that's where you'll see a lot of creative challenges in mail pieces, and that's where a lot of them start to have issues. And we're going to look at how to get through that 3 to 15 second window. If you're dealing with, well, let's say the email moment. For the email moment, the first 3 seconds is all about the subject line. So we immediately read the subject line. If it seems relevant, maybe we'll save it, get to it later, we'll delete it right away. According to the DMA stat file, on emails, in your subject line, anything over 35 characters, including spaces, you'll start to see a decline in the open or the click-through rate. So even in my personal emails or emails I send, from a business perspective, I count my characters to make sure I'm within that 35 character window. And on an email moment, the 4th to the 15th second would be anything that you can see in a reading pane if you happen to have it open. So on my emails, I've got the upper portion of the email visible. So that would be a great place to put an offer, for instance. And a lot of times on emails or digital pages, offers or things like that, or who knows where they are. Now, beyond the 3-second, 15-second rule, we also have what's called the 40-40-20 rule. So when you consider a mail campaign, 40% of your success is your target audience, 40% is the offer, and 20% is the creative or the design. Now, this does not mean that creative is insignificant, because to me, offer and creative go together. Because you can create a great piece, but if I can't see the offer, then it may not get past that 3 to 15 second window. Now, when we talk about the mail moment, some of the statistics of it, 98% of us will bring our mail in every day, and 81% of us will read it immediately. And so we'll spend about 30 minutes a week reading our mail, whether it's, let's say, it's 5 minutes a day if you sort and read it every day, or maybe on Saturday if you're sitting down with your coffee, you might go through the mail that you had for the week. So we'll spend a half hour with our mail. It's very popular now with Gen X, Gen Y, millennials. I think it's a myth that a lot of people think that young people don't want to get mail. If anything, they don't get a lot of mail. Therefore, they're not, again, desensitized. They look for more mail. Now, there was a study that was done in England, and they asked the question that, does your brain treat digital and hard copy differently? So as you look at this chart, what they noticed was that's a brain, and the portion that is in red is your brain processing direct mail. The little dot that's in blue is your brain processing digital images. What they noticed was direct mail was in that part of the brain that dealt more with visual, the portion of your brain that deals more with memory, and the images, those things became more concrete. So the message was seemed as more real when it was in print versus digital. Working my clicker here.
Jim, we had a great question from Barb.
Okay.
She said, what equals an offer for a nonprofit?
Offers for nonprofits could be, okay, now when I say offer doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving anything away. Maybe you're, it doesn't have to be coupons or 50% off. Maybe what you're offering is exclusivity, or you're offering, the opportunity to be generous. And, nonprofits certainly have a lot of, tools. They can use the mailing labels, the little free, tchotchke type things that you can give away. So there are all kinds of studies on what different offers can look like. You'll see in a minute, I'll get to a group that's called who'smailingwhat.com will be a place that you can look at a lot of the offers that nonprofits utilize. One of the things they noticed on that study was that we internalize things a lot deeper when we're looking at it in hard copy. It's kind of like when you read a book or you watch the movie. When you're reading the book, you're relating it to how you understand things. Your mental pictures, your memory cues are all relative to how you think. If you're watching it on digital, then it's somebody else's family driving that car that you may want. If it's in a hard copy, it's your family in that particular car. So your brain does pretty good on hard copy. Now, this is from the DMA response rate study, and the way you'd look at this chart is the columns in black are retention campaigns or your house list. The ones in gray are an acquisition campaign. And looking on the left, you can see that direct mail overall for a retention campaign was 3.4%, 1.25 for acquisition. If you look over here at email, which is about the middle, you'll see that it's gone way down. So, I like to use email as a channel. I know Sarah used it to send out reminders for this webinar. So email does work. But, it's something, do you have a game plan for email and direct mail working together? I think on average we have about 28% of our emails in a year will go bad. So do you have a way to connect that email to an address so you can at least have another form of communication should email not work out for you? Excuse me. Now, when you think about starting a campaign, you really have a lot of formats that are available to you out there, and which ones are better than others? Which one do I use? Postcards are a little less expensive than, envelopes or self-mailers. What should I consider? And really, when you look at the different formats, it just boils down to two different kinds, and that's an envelope package and a self-mailer. And envelope packages are great because it really gives you the opportunity or the real estate to say what you need to say to make the sale. So if you need to add brochures or pictures or testimonials or facts and figures, reply cards, everything you need to make the sale. Self-mailers are great for, just simple messages, events happening this weekend. Where you see a lot of issues, though, is a lot of people will try to take an envelope's worth of information and cram it on a postcard. And they just fill it up with as much stuff as you can think of because they want to say what they need to say. I laugh at the political postcards that you see come out because they'll tell you about everybody and their grandma endorsing them. They like the cost of the postcards, but they sure want to talk a lot on it. Now, if you look at the bottom of that slide, you'll see that fewer than 17% of the grand controls, and what a grand control is, it's a mail piece that was in the mail stream for at least 3 years, so they had a good track record of how it performed. And this is according to who'smailingwhat.com. And what they do is they've got a library going back now about 12 years of all the different mail pieces out there. So when you asked the nonprofit question earlier, I use it because if I were maybe speaking to a nonprofit and I wanted to see, what formats, what offers, what other people were using out there, I'd be able to look in that library and get an idea of what people's mail moment would look like. So, a lot of the pieces may be about 3 months old, so it's not like you're going to get, looking at someone's piece that you can immediately go to market and try to counteract it, but it gives you an idea of the history and pattern of what is out there. But what they noticed is that fewer than 17% of the grand controls were self-mailers. So that means, by and large, most of them are using envelope formats. Excuse me, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just suggesting which one am I going to use and what's my intent behind it. And at the end of the presentation, like I said, we're going to look at a couple of pieces and share some ideas on how it might be tweaked. Now, what we've seen in the mail stream is from an acquisition perspective or standard mail, letters and envelope formats are still the most used, or what we see in the mail stream. I know this is 2010 data, but our pattern looks the same, or has looked the same the last 7 years, other than the volume differences. Now, hey, why do people open envelopes? I don't know if you can read that, but this was a crazy letter that I had gotten, and it said, let's see, if you throw this in your wastebasket unopened, a capsule of water inside will break, spilling onto a dehydrated boa constrictor. He will then crawl out of the envelope and crush your little body. So, all right, that's kind of funny. Get your attention. It was very clever, and that was how they wanted to get the envelope open. But you can see I have there in blue where it says clarity will always trump cleverness. And I see a lot of very clever mail pieces out there that aren't very clear. Because you could spend a lot of money, 5 to 10 cents extra on a mail piece to spice it up with color or texture or, even smell and sound nowadays. But how clear is your message? You can be clear and you can be clever, but don't let clarity get lost in all your cleverness. If you look at number 1 there, it's the timing of the piece and the need for the service. So, I know in retail that has a lot to do with recency, frequency, and monetary needs. Since we have some nonprofits on the line, I know it's a big challenge for you guys to consider the timing of the piece. I had the New Orleans territory at one time, and when Katrina came through, it caused a dilemma in the nonprofits across the country because, people were motivated to donate to the different Katrina funds. But, if you were in that neck of the woods, people may not have extra money for your organizations if you waited till much later in the year. So, those are things you have to consider with timing. And when I think of catalogers in retail, the fall lineup should happen, but if we have a late or Indian summer, that impacts the product lineup. When I look at oil change pieces, I think the recommended amount is 3,000 miles, but I only change mine about every 5 to 7,000 miles. So if you were timing a piece for me, you need to pay attention to your data and not waste, let's say, every other mailing. Now, remember the first 3 seconds about the mail moment was all about grabbing your attention. So things that grab someone's attention could be shape, it could be size, it could be colors, images, and that's fine. So what am I going to create in the piece to grab somebody's attention? The hard part again now is that 4th to the 15th second. Once I've gotten your attention, how do I create for comprehension? Remember, comprehension is really the ability to read and understand what's going on with the piece. What we're going to look at here is a study that was done by Professor Sigrid Vogel. If you Google it, you'll see it's an outfit that has been around over 40 years conducting these tests on how people interact with different mediums. So let's say this audience had an opportunity to participate. They would have, put laser beams and cameras and things like that on our head, and they would watch how we interacted with media. So let's say, for example, you were reading a brochure or looking at a web page. They could tell from heat signatures whether you were reading it or were you actually just glancing at it. What order did you look at things? And from these different studies, they have now noticed how people interact or behave when they're dealing with printed media. One of the things that they noticed right away was that pictures will draw your eye before product or object shots. So if we're looking at this illustration of the drill, that's great. You can also put the drill in, this lady's hand, the Susie homemaker who wants to work hard at home doing it. What if we put a low-cut night dress on her? Do you think it would be as effective? It probably wouldn't. I'd see a lot of pictures, excuse me, a lot of times where, the images compete too much with the product. I was dealing with a vitamin company, and they were very proud of their vitamins. And if you went to their web page, if you looked at all their printed material, you know, they had big pictures of their jars of vitamins. But I am creatively challenged to figure out a sexy way to sell vitamins. I mean, to me, it's a jar. It's got some good stuff in it, but there's not a lot you can do with it. And in working with them, I noticed they had one of their products was called NRG. So, okay, great. You've got all these vitamins that deal with energy, but I don't see anything energetic about the product. You know, have you considered using images of people being active or being more active so that that could help sell the idea of the product? And they changed on their website, just to test it, an image of someone being energetic versus the product itself being predominant. And immediately noticed more hits on their web page just doing it that way. A blast is something that we are kind of desensitized to now. We see it and we just kind of dismiss it. What works well, though, is a Johnson box. And a Johnson box is what you see in the bottom, and that is you just put a box around what it is you're trying to draw attention to. And you don't fill it in with background color, because then it doesn't look like a Johnson box anymore. So in this particular case, you put it around, a good place to put it around would be the offer. So I see a lot of pieces that use Johnson boxes, but they put it around the T's and C's, or, you know, the legalese language that makes no sense. I don't know why you'd even draw attention to it by putting a box around it. Use the box for offers. Excuse me. Now, colors have a lot to do with how pieces are seen. Warm colors, which are those that are on the left, will draw your eyes before cool or neutral colors. So if we look at all the warm ones, you've got red in there. Red is an interesting one because 1 out of 7 people are colorblind, and red is the most common colorblind color. And more men are colorblind than women. So red's a good color, but if you use it too much, or you're using it on men or just different things, it's going to have less of an impact because it wouldn't stand out as much to that particular group. When it comes to, remember now, we're talking about comprehension. So if we look at this chart here, it shows that black on white is the best for comprehension. If you look at reverse print on any other color, you'll see it didn't score well. And it's not that the color combination isn't nice, it's just from a comprehension perspective, it's not an easy thing to read. So you have to ask yourself, have I already gotten your attention with colors and other things? Now I need to make comprehension easier for you. I need to facilitate a conversation. Down at the bottom, you notice that 93% of participants find all caps are hard to read. Not hard to see, just hard to read. There's a book by a gentleman named Colin Wheeldon, and it says, are you creating dialogue or pretty shapes? Because in that 3 to 15-second window, we treat all caps as a block. It's just a block visually to us. So it would make reading difficult. And you'll see a lot of mail pieces that have all caps in it. And I know if we're talking email, you know, they say that that's like yelling at you, but all caps are just hard to read, not hard to see. Remember, what I'm trying to do is facilitate a conversation and make it easier on the participant to read. You know, normal type layout is the easiest to read. Bold, you know, bold is okay, but we tend to overuse it. I see a lot of renewal letters that, you know, they want me to renew my subscription or, you know, my nonprofit donations, and there'll be 6 bold things on the cover letter. So if 6 things stand out, then nothing stands out. You should make it real easy. 1 or 2 offers or strong things if you want to use bold, but not everything on a piece can be important. There is a debate between serif and sans serif, and a serif font is one that has a foot on it, like Times Roman is one of, and sans serif is the one where there is no tail on the like sans serif. I think a lot of it depends on whether you're looking at print or you're looking at, say, digital or web page. But I'll leave that up to you guys to debate that one. Now, 12-point is the best for body copy, but not all 12-point is created equal. So you can see in this example, we've got 6 different 12-point fonts. So in some cases, you may need to bump up your point sizes if you find it too small. Now, before we had talked about all caps being hard to read, reverse print is also difficult to read. It's okay for like short headings, but not for body copy. If you're using reverse print to help sell the product, you'll run into a little trouble. And again, we're going to look at some pieces that effectively used reverse print and those where I might have tweaked it. When we look at envelopes, you can see, actually, let me go back to the envelope. I think I went too far here. Oh, here we go. So when people look at an envelope, they'll look at their name, the address it came from, and what postage is. And if you have any teaser copy, then we notice the teaser copy. And remember, teaser copy is just designed to get the envelope opened. Now, a lot of people will ask, should I use stamp? Should I use an indicia? Should I use first class versus standard? We haven't done a study in a while, but the last one I had seen showed less than 1% difference between standard versus first class or stamp versus non-stamp. If you're sending millions, it can make a difference. But if you're sending a few thousand, I don't know that you'd have a huge statistical difference to look at. Now, when we look at what's inside the envelope, so in the example that we have here, sorry, I'm not working the buttons so correctly. So typically how we'll look at it is we'll look at the heading, we'll drop down the signature to see who it came from, and then go back up and work our way down. In this particular example, we've got an image or a photo in the upper right, and that's a good placement for it. If we had put that at the bottom, then our eyes would be drawn to the photo, because remember, we look at images, and a lot of the information above it we would have overlooked just because we're drawn to the image. So here was a good layout. When we look at catalogs or self-mailers, you have to pay attention to the way the story unfolds. In this particular case, this is a catalog, and when you open up a catalog, the first page that you see is the right-hand page, because that's the first image that comes out the way we turn. And the left will typically, the right-hand page will typically outsell the left-hand page unless you creatively draw me back to the left so that I consider the image. Now, in this case, they used a huge image on the left to help draw you back to it. When you're using people, though, you have to pay attention to what's called gaze motion or action motion. The model on the left is looking off of the page. A better position for her would have been to just reverse that image so that now she's looking back to the right. Because what will happen is we'll follow her action and just look off the page and turn it and go on to the next one. If you're looking at the right-hand image, the lady in the number 1 spot, I would reverse her image too, have her facing to the left so that everybody's in sync. This piece also has some difficulty with the reverse print on it, because this would have been a difficult read for most people. Now, I'm going to show you an example of an eye tracking study that was done on a door hanger. So this was a Kellogg's piece, and they wanted you to try Special K. If you look at the middle piece, you'll see the heat signature. So you can see they spent a lot of time looking, obviously, at the offer. Didn't see a lot about the logo, but they went down, the left and the middle. And on the far left, you can see the order that they looked at things. So they were immediately drawn to that Special K, because you have some good contrast there, that red on white. And then they went down to the offer. But what I found interesting on this piece is if you look at the woman that's on the piece, she's got an hourglass shape. And some of you may have looked at this and say, I didn't even notice her in the piece. I know why she's there, to help support, if you try, the special K, you too can have an hourglass figure. But what I find interesting is no one looked at her shape. A few people looked at her face, but no one looked at her shape. So my feedback on this piece would be, I don't know that she's even necessary to the piece at all. I would take her out completely. Don't even confuse the piece with her being in it, because she really didn't help it when you look at the eye tracking study. If anything, she would have detracted from it. So this is an example of how one of these studies look, or would show up. Now, this was a SelfNaylor. So the way the SelfNaylor unfolded, I thought they did a good job. I know you can't see the images really well, but they had bigger pictures on the left to draw you back to the left, and then the action moved to the right. You can see the offer. Actually, the offer is free, 30% off, free something. But you can see from the heat signature, the offer was clear, easy to understand. And from a cleverness perspective, this is a die-cut piece, so it's got some odd shape to it, but it was clear and clever. So I thought this was a good one. When you're looking at basic layout, again, if you have pictures at the top, headline, body copy, it's good for comprehension. But again, notice in that middle example, if you're putting the picture down at the bottom, what it does to the comprehension level. You didn't change anything other than the location, but it just doesn't flow when you're mixing it up with pictures like that. And you can see that reference there to the comprehension research by Colin Wielden. You'll find it's a good reference book if you want to keep one around. Now, this is one that deals with colors by culture. I was working with an Asian ad agency, and we had talked about colors earlier in the presentation, and I was discussing some, and they showed me this because they said, well, wait a second, you're talking about certain colors in the Asian culture that have a significant impact. So the way you would read this chart is on the left has different emotions, like the first one is anger, art, creativity, authority, and then across the top you have the different cultures. So you have Western and U.S. all the way to South American on the far right. So when I look at this chart, I kind of pay attention, or I look at colors that, like on the Western U.S., a lot of colors mean a lot of things. On the South American side, there were a few colors, so I paid attention to those as well, because I'm like, all right, I'll give you an example of how I used it. So I was dealing with a funeral and child death insurance, not a happy subject, nothing that a parent even wants to think about. And we were discussing it from an aspect of Hispanic, because they wanted to grow the Hispanic side of their business, but when we looked at colors on the next slide, I looked at South American, and I noticed that, well, in this particular case, you can see that danger is a red color for Hispanics. Green means death. So, if we were talking about funeral insurance, then maybe green would be, if I'm using maybe some of the felt curtains or different images in the piece, then maybe I could use green as that subtle text behind it. So those are how you might consider the different colors in culture. So I have 2 slides on that, because there are, I guess, a lot of emotions out there. Now, on the mail piece, you want to give a lot of different ways for people to respond, unless you're trying to control it. If you're trying to force everything to a call center, you could do that. But people nowadays like to respond, via their computers, their phones. 2012 was the first year that mobile devices outsold computers. So I think we're starting to show where our preference is in communicating, shopping, looking things up. So you need to have a lot of different ways to give your customers to respond. You know, in the mail piece, you can do that. You can put websites, phone numbers, QR codes, pearls, or again, they can just pick up the phone and call. And you also have to think, this next one, you can't just do one campaign, assume, you know, one shot doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful. You know, if you have inventory clearance and you run out when you run out, that's different. But, you know, you have to think campaigns. You know, how many touches do I need to reach you effectively? Do I only touch you once a year? Do I do it once a month? Again, in retail, they look at that recency, frequency, monetary model to help determine how often, you know, when is the right offer at the right time. Now, let's look at some before and after examples. Here's a tale of two creatives. If you look at the original, which is in the upper left, I like the, you know, the images and the layout, and I think the color combinations look good together. But the difficulty in this case was the reverse print. If you were interested in the product, it would have been difficult, or was difficult, to read additional information to help push you over the edge, so to speak. You know, if you look at the bottom right, just making some subtle changes and putting, let's say, black on that tan color or leather-looking color, you had enough contrast where it was a much easier read in this particular case. And you can see they used the Johnson box in that Highlander, you know, next to that Highlander piece. So that was a good way to draw you into that. Here's another example. The upper left, I like the greens. I like the way they laid everything out. But again, it was a reverse print issue where now it was difficult to find out more about that product. So they got a much greater response on just doing a simple design change and putting things, you know, again, black on white. Because remember, the images are what grabbed my attention, but now I want to find out more about the product. So I need to be able to easily read information on the product. Let's look at this one. So if you look in the upper left, what's the offer? You know, most people look at that and, you know, the red draws you into summer sale, but my question is, summer sale the offer, or is that 50% off the offer? So again, I'm drawn in the red, so make sure it stands out with the offer. If we actually look at the back of that card, you'll see that the original card had 6 red things on it. Fortunately for this piece, the offer stood out, you know, save up to 50%. So it's kind of interesting that on one side of the card, they had summer sale in red. On the back side of the card, they had 50% in red. So from a design perspective, the feedback was, look, first of all, if you have 6 red things that stand out, nothing stands out. So in the redesign, it was leave 50% in red, and down at the bottom, there's actually, it says pay no interest for 6 months, which in itself is an offer. So to make it a strong one, your eyes are visually drawn to red, red, which is offer, offer. If you're interested in those offer, and it was quickly easy to figure out what it was, you'll read the rest of the detail on the piece. When we talk about personalization, if you look at the piece on the left from National Tire Battery, I don't know if you can read it so well, but they've got Richard Jim everywhere. And this happens a lot to me because I have 2 first names, but it's Jim Richard, not Richard Jim. So I can always tell when someone's trying to be good attempt at personalization, but bad results because you got my name backwards. And on this particular piece on the left, there's reverse print and some other things that worked against it. You know, even in the original, the offer wasn't necessarily easy to see, but on the redesign on the right, they did much better on the personalization for me. But I thought it was kind of ironic that if you read, you'll see that It's time for my Mazda 3 to get an oil change. I don't own a Mazda 3. I only have a Mazda 3. So it's kind of funny that they're trying to make the vehicle personal as well, but too many fields in there. So it's a little tweaking someone needs to look at. And again, when we talk about timing of the piece, my feedback to them was, look at my history. When have I ever come in at 3,000 miles? Why don't you on that? I don't want you to not mail that every other mailing, but what you might do on that one is mix it up and have brake specials or tires or something other than oil change, because you know I'm not responding to that particular offer. Now, we talked about grain controls from the who'smailingwhat.com library, so I want to show you a couple of them, see if you recognize them and why they probably were used as often as they did. So here's the first one. How many of you probably either have one in your purse, your desk, or near you, because we all seem to get that Bed Bath & Beyond 20%. What's the offer in this piece? It probably only took you a split second to figure it out. And I like Bed Bath & Beyond using this. I mean, they have tried to, they try a lot of different tests to see if they can beat this control piece. And they haven't been as successful. For some reason, this good, simple postcard format, simple message, 20% off, bring it in. Coupon never expires. I hear about that all the time. But it was a good piece and effective use of a postcard format. I know in my mailbox I see a lot of this type format now, where it's almost the identical size to the Bed Bath & Beyond piece. Here's one from Omaha Steak. So what do you think in this piece allowed it to be so successful? For me, it was the images. So if you, unless you're a vegetarian, this piece wouldn't do so well with a vegetarian, but if you're a meat eater, man, this product just sells itself. They didn't clutter it with models eating steaks. They just let the steak and the other meat products speak for themselves. So they've done really well. You know, and the offer stands out on the piece, $19.99. They didn't put it in a blast. They just right there on the piece. I thought this was a good use of a SelfNaylor as well. Here's one that was a nonprofit has done really well, and this is what it is. It's an empty bag. So would this stand out in your mailbox? And I think the answer is it would. So obviously in this particular one is they want you to open the bag. It's empty, you know, fill it with, you know, the donations and things that they're asking for. And I thought this was, for them, that's worked really well. And you notice on the image, that vehicle that's on the mailing label is driving left to right. So that's where the action motion is. So a good place to have put the offer would have been just to the right of that vehicle, just because that's the action and flow of the particular piece. We had even used something similar to this in a campaign that we had done to marketing folks, where we had a deli menu of different marketing options, of different things that direct mail could do for you, and we sent it in a lunch sack, or what a deli sack would look like. We had a lot of good response on that one. Here's a very famous one, Wall Street Journal. They'd had this piece, gosh, almost 14 years. And if you've gotten this piece, the original version, it talked about two people going to college. You know, again, one got the Wall Street Journal, one didn't. And obviously the person with the Wall Street Journal subscription went on to renown and fame and probably had their college roommate working for them. But this one originally had 2 pages in the letter that gave that particular story, and they just were trying to find ways to beat the control. So someone had a bright idea that said, all right, let's expound on the story and let's make it 4 pages instead of 2. So they got more detailed and descriptive in the story, and it actually outperformed the 2-page version, and they stuck with that. So the Wall Street Journal, and it's a good use of a letter format because they used it to, you know, tell a personal story. Personal stories are great on nonprofits too, when you can talk about your organization. Sarah, we should, okay. Now, these are some pieces that were sent to Sarah. So I'm going to give you some feedback on them and just give you an idea of what I might tweak on them. Now, so, you know, some people may ask, well, which side is going to be face up when you get a postcard in the mailbox? People flip it, so it goes back and forth. You know, most of the time the address side is up. It just depends on what the carrier does when they put in it. So I always want to make sure that on a piece I have a strong offer on either side to draw your attention. So I'll start with what I see in the upper left. So first of all, I think that this is a great format for what you're trying to say. So it's a good postcard format. Right away, even though this is reverse print, I feel that the offer stood out right away, and that was up to 70% off retail. I think on the front side, none of the reverse print really hurt this piece at all. What I would probably do a little different, though, is on the top where the offer is, I would have taken everything out of the all caps. So it didn't hurt it it really didn't hurt it in this piece, but I think I would have just taken it out of all caps. I think the font sizes worked fine. That orange stood out where it says, you know, again, get the $5 off. But this is similar to a blast in the way it works. So other than the all caps, I really wouldn't change anything about the front of the card. If I look at the images, the baby that's in the middle, her or him, the action motion is a little, they're looking off the page, so to speak. I almost would have taken, maybe either reverse that image or take it out completely and let those other two children, you know, have greater space in this particular case. Now, it's hard to see the back of the card, but what I like about it was there's a map on it. So maps are very effective, you know, in drawing your attention and getting you there. The reverse print on the back was more of a challenge than the front. I almost would have taken, maybe even just had it a white background and put things in either black or dark blue, those type things, just so there's greater contrast. Because the offer on the front would have made me want to read more about the offer on the back. And I would mix it up differently on the back to get more contrast, black on white, those type things. But I think the images are very powerful that you use on this particular piece.
And it looks like Greg had a question. He wanted to know what did you think about the color?
Greg, the color combinations are great. You know, you didn't use warm or neutral color, or, you know, the warm colors, but that's okay. You know, this might be part of your brand, part of the imaging. Again, what I liked about it was the offer stood out so much. But I think you know, again, that blue-orange, I think the contrast, everything stood out well. I don't think you overused any particular color. It would just be the back I would consider getting some more black on white or black on, you know, some other variation to it. Because you did selling with the offer on the front. Now make it easy for me to read. Excuse me. I'd seen this one earlier, and so, you know, this looks like it could be a SelfNaylor or a handout brochure, and I assume it would be a trifold. So let me start with the image in the upper left. So Class Act was easy to read, and you didn't have it in all caps, which was actually kind of nice, so it actually made it easier for me to read. You know, the colors on the that side are very interesting. I think they flow together and they work well, and I don't think the reverse print affected that side of the piece. Now, when I get to, let's say, the red background, the curtains on it, this is where I think that the reverse print could have been an issue. And the reason I say that is I think the outer portion would have grabbed my attention to want to read it on the inside, but it might have been difficult. Now, if this is one that's being sent out to, I guess, season pass or frequent visitors, they're going to read it all anyway if it's one of your type customers. But if this were acquisition, I need to make it easier for them to read. Now, one way I might have done that is the curtain background worked, but I don't know if your theater is using red curtains, or if I perhaps could get away with using a beige or a different color curtain, where then I could put black or a darker color on it for better contrast. I just think then it would have made that conversation easier to read and understand. So it's not so much the red and white together, it's just the reverse print would have been a challenge for most people reading it. So, but, you know, I think it's a great format for the way this unfolded and told that story. So I don't know if Elizabeth had any questions or thought on that, but it is a nice piece.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we've gotten any questions from her.
Okay. And it is a classy piece, so yes, good job on the class act. Now, so in this case with Bob in the postcard, so since we're looking at the big image that's on the right, so what happened is my eyes were drawn to the left part of the image, then the right, and I just kept going back and forth because I couldn't find anything that I could read. And I'm just telling you how I reacted in that first 3 to 15-second window, because then I try to figure out, all right, if that's how I reacted to it, could I have done it slightly different? Now, in this case, since everything is all caps everywhere, it didn't give my eyes anything to start reading. Because now, visually, to me, it's block, 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 block. And as a matter of fact, you know, the online demos and Suede TV is finally, that whole section I can start to read. I don't think the reverse print necessarily hurt it, but I would have, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I said it's all caps, but the reverse print over that image was a little challenging. Anytime you put text over images or photos, it could be a challenge because it may not show through as well. What I finally started reading was where it says audio, video, internet production. So when that finally came into focus to me visually, I could look at that. If I'm looking at now I'm looking at the bottom left image. I think I would have used if I could work more images into it, like examples of your work. You know, like you talk about your recording studio or your TV commercial, so perhaps I could use your facilities in action. And maybe you have, instead of, you know, 9 or 10 bullets of all your capabilities, you know, emphasize the studio and really try to draw you online to get more information. The reverse print down on the front of the card where you're talking about your recording studio video editing, you know, in this case, I think the black and white to me was just a difficult read. I'd look at some more images or stock images that you may have in there, and then test one against the other to see how it does. Good use of format, though, for what you're trying to say. And this is one where I'd almost consider a maybe even a letter format, because has someone gone into one of your studios, you know, maybe I'm trying to cut a demo or something, and I use your facilities and, you know, had some high-quality demos that I sent out that did really well. You know, so could you talk about that story, live the dream, that kind of stuff. And Sarah, I don't know if this was the last piece that we had gotten.
Yep, that's just the last piece. We have about 5 minutes left, so I thought I'd just try to hit on some of the questions we're getting. And just a lot of people are asking if this webinar will be available after, and yes, it will. We'll send a link out for everyone so that they can watch the recording because some people had to leave a little earlier. But we had a lot of great questions. Thank you, everyone. Just a question here from Emily, and this is regarding an envelope over a self-mailer. She thought it was surprising because envelopes require more work, i.e. opening them, to get the visual offer. Wouldn't a postcard be more impactful in 3 seconds?
Okay, now, postcards are the most read because the message is right there. It's out in the open. The letter formats have proven more responsive. So, you know, the job of the envelope is to get open. So whether it be teaser copy or things like that that draw you inside, yeah, it is more work and effort to get into it, to get to the message. But again, with the real estate available to you, it gives you what you need to make the sale. So again, if I'm dealing with the postcards are the most read, but the most responsive were the letters.
Okay, so people read postcards, but the response rate with someone on a letter was higher.
Yeah, and that's where I might run a test. Like in this case with Bob's piece, you know, I think Bob would be really good at telling a personal story with this type, the services that he offers. So this is where I might run a test to see which format did do better.
Right. So it looks like we probably have time for one more question. We had someone, it was Maureen. She said she really appreciated that we addressed the specific needs of a nonprofit, but she's also works in the nonprofit sector but is an artist. And we didn't know if you had any good advice or anything as far as exhibition announcements or any best practices for artists who were trying to send out mailers to get some hype around an exhibition.
You know, if I'm dealing with, and I love art galleries, so I really like getting art gallery stuff. So the art is the star of the show. So I would want to make sure that if I'm doing an exhibition that I would use a lot of the images that would allow the exhibition to sell itself. The tendency on a exhibition, though, is they want to put information about the event or those type things sometimes over the images themselves, and I think that detracts away from it. So I would let the images have dominance, because if they're interested in that kind of exhibition, then the images will draw you in, and then make sure that when you're giving details about the event, that I give the contrast in there that's easy to read.
Okay. There's actually was another great question from Elizabeth that I want to just quick slide in there. She asked, does your presentation apply to the corporate market? All the kind of best practices that you went over.
So I would assume that's like a business-to-business type approach.
Yes.
There's a lot of clutter, you know, in the B2B environment as well. All the principles would, the creatives would not change, because you're still going to have your mail moment at work versus home. So you just want to follow the same creative principles. So I still have to be able to look at my B2B mail piece and figure out what it is you're trying to get me to do. I think the fault with a lot of B2B pieces is, you know, they're giving me tons of features, you know, about their product and their services, but not enough about the benefits or the story or why I needed that kind of stuff. But again, it would be the same approach. I think you'll see more letter format type approach too on a B2B environment.
Okay, great. Well,
And
then go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm saying from our perspective, I work a lot of trade shows, and one that's been, we do a lot of letter format type things that we send out to attendees. And like we'll make sure that there's thickness to the piece, you know, so when people feel thickness, they want to open it up to find out what's in it. we'll use things like that to help draw you into the envelope, come by, obviously giveaway to come by the booth. But that's worked effective for our team.
Okay, great. Well, I think we got to kind of wrap things up, but thank you very much, Jim. That was great. And thank you to everyone who submitted your pieces and your questions. We'll still try to get to some of your questions, just send you a message back. So we'll also send a follow-up email with a link to the presentation once we have it uploaded on our site. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and just give us your feedback. Let us know what you liked about it, what you didn't. We want to keep doing these in the future, and we want to help you guys have successful direct mail pieces. So thank you to everyone who attended. And thank you, Jim, and thank you, Eric and Gail.
Thank you.
All right, guys, have a good afternoon.
You too. Thanks.